my name is Nasha Torres, and I'm the Dean of Students here at UNM. I know some of you. And what Lydia and I thought we would do with this presentation is start with telling you a little bit about our background and then diving into the presentation. So I've been the Dean of Students for 2 years. I'm going into my third. And our office oversees student rights and responsibilities, which is also conduct, more commonly known as conduct. But that name, student rights and responsibilities, is important because sometimes we find ourselves in this position where we are advocating or standing up for protecting the students' rights while simultaneously enforcing the rules. And that can be difficult for faculty, and so it's nice to see you here so that if and when we have a bumpy situation, at least we've established a baseline relationship, right? Before I was the Dean of Students, I practiced law for 10 years. I did both my undergraduate and my law degrees at UNM. When I practiced law, I did student issues and disability issues, employment, labor, represented K through 12 schools, and also worked at the university. So it's been actually a really great background for this position. I'm surprised, and I tell law students all the time when they're looking at exploring different things to do with a law degree, how much you can use that information in other ways. And so I found that it's been an asset in this job because I can help students understand our process and our rules, and I can also help explain that to faculty. Lydia.
Hello everybody, my name is Lydia Wohlberg. I work here in the Dean of Students office. I'm considered the care team specialist. So the care team is a multidisciplinary team within the Dean of Students office that is housed by SHAC, representatives from SHAC, representatives from ARC, representatives from student housing, the UNM Police, OEO, University Council. We meet on a weekly basis and we review reports that we receive from the public, from faculty, from other students, about students who are exhibiting concerning or disturbing or dangerous behavior. So we then convene, we discuss the report, and we help faculty follow up on best approaches. We reach out to the students sometimes directly. So it's a really versatile team that addresses a lot of the material that we're going to cover today. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in the state of New Mexico. I've been at the university for 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was working at district court. Prior to that, I was an adjudicator for Social Security disability. And prior to that, I provided therapy to primarily men who were recently paroled or on probation for violent crimes. So I want to thank you all here today, and those who came in a little bit later. If you guys want us to email you the presentation, please feel free to let us know. We're happy to do that. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, let us know what's going on. And if anybody has any feedback from your own faculty perspective, please feel free to share that. So we're just going to address this material in hopefully to help you assist in navigating some potentially uncomfortable classroom dynamics.
We thought we'd start by giving you some context, which is important to keep in mind about who our students are and what our student population looks like. So as you can see here, the majority of our students are New Mexico residents. And many of our students, the average age of a student in undergraduate studies has changed over the years, but a lot of our students are non-traditional. And a lot of our students, as we see in the Dean of Students office with the Lobo Food Pantry and our short-term loan program, many of our students are working lots of jobs. They may have kids, they may be taking care of parents or younger siblings. They have a lot of things that they're bringing to the table with them. New Mexico is like my home state, and of course I love it. We are the land of enchantment, but for those of you that live here, we also know there are problems. So we have problems with early intervention in education. We have problems with stability in children's homes. We have problems with poverty and trauma. Recently, there was a study done by Dr. Shi at UNMH that looked at these incidents and coined the phrase adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And so an ACE could be physical abuse or sexual abuse, emotional neglect, intimate partner violence. Most young people in New Mexico and our college students have experienced multiple ACEs before they get here. And that impacts how they learn, that impacts how they perceive their environment, that impacts how they operate, and it definitely impacts how we interact with them.
We wanted to share this information just from the Dean of Students perspective. We don't want to speak for faculty, but we try to keep this stuff in mind to have a more empathic approach whenever we are interacting with students. We don't want to make assumptions, but we do try to keep this in mind about our student population when we speak with them.
So UNM is home to people with invisible and visible disabilities. And we have seen a stark increase at the University of New Mexico, but we're also seeing that nationwide. So at the University of New Mexico, the Accessibility Resource Center has seen a 149% increase in students that registered as having a disability in the past 10 years. So let me just break that down a tad bit. Students that have disabilities, when you get through to, in K through 12, the school's required to identify that you have a disability and come up with services to serve you. In higher education, it's up to the student to self-identify as having a disability, so that requires acknowledging that you have a problem, which some people don't, like, you may think they have a problem, but they don't, right? And that's their right. 2, getting medical documentation to prove that they do have an issue that they need help with, and then 3, registering it with ARC. So just because ARC has seen this increase doesn't necessarily mean that's only capturing a fraction of the population that might actually have a disability in some form.
We also wanted to share this information that we got from a recent conduct training that we went to in Florida. An advocate for working with students who are diagnosed as being on the spectrum shared this with us, indicating that there is going to be an increase with students who are diagnosed as being on the spectrum. So this, again, is going to be a huge part of our student population, and again, it's just something that we want to be cognizant of when we are interacting with students who may be exhibiting some concerning behavior.
So we came up with this visual aid that can show you kind of what we're working with. Disruptive behavior, which is like they arrive to class late, they leave early, we're going to break all this down for you. And then it can go all the way to it's threatened themselves, you, or other students with violence, right? What I will say as a precursor is that we in our office see all of this. This and the dangerous area tends to be very rare. And almost all the cases that are in this area started here. And so if you have tools and you have different things, resources and different skills that you can employ to diffuse a situation, to lay boundaries, to control the classroom, to protect yourself and others while simultaneously respecting a student, it can prevent it from getting worse.
So these are just some examples that we have seen in the past about disruptive behaviors. So the most common ones that we hear about are repeatedly dominating class discussions, using cell phones, shouting or belittling others, or using profanity in class, or inappropriate email correspondence with students and faculty. And again, we categorize this as disruptive because it's not necessarily breaking any rules, it's not necessarily threatening anybody, but again, it's still creating a bump in the road for your academic environment.
This type of behavior can also impede other students' abilities to learn in the classroom, to feel comfortable in the classroom. If it's not corrected, it can get much worse. In this part, when we see behavior in this spectrum, what I tell the students and the faculty members that are encountering it is that we're not just teaching a young person, how to be an accountant, for example, or a scientist or a teacher. We're also teaching them how to be good colleagues, good professionals, good citizens. And for many of our students, and this is important to realize in higher education, they're going through a developmental phase where they're learning this. It's almost like they're trying out new dance moves sometimes. And it's our job to just be like, that wasn't as well received as you thought it might have been, right? Then they can modify their approach. So with a lot of people that have problems like this, with modification and with coaching, we see it end.
So these are some examples of how you can address some disruptive behaviors. So I always encourage faculty to utilize those first few class sessions and the support of your syllabus to kind of nip this stuff in the bud before it becomes an issue. And as Nasha said, a lot of these students, 18 to 24-year-olds, they are kind of developing their voice for the first time, their identity, their belief systems. And they may use your classes to test those systems, to talk about what they believe or they think that they believe. So it's really important to model to them what you deem to be meaningful participation in your class. Outline what your ground rules are, especially when time limits come into question. And this is a really good, interesting link, and of course we're happy to distribute this from a PhD who talks about how to deal with students who monopolize classroom conversations. So again, going back and making sure that your syllabus is concrete and it supports all the things that you expect from your students. And it's really important to know what is in your syllabus. I don't know that this always happens, but I have an idea that it might happen where some instructors may just regurgitate the same syllabus over and over again, may not know what's in there, maybe they just copied and pasted from other colleagues. Know what's in there, especially when it comes to what your expectations are in the class. Because if a student tries to challenge you, you need to be able to back it up, basically. Yeah, absolutely.
Could you go back?
Yeah, sure.
So it obviously makes intuitive sense. The absence policy should be consistent among students. I'm assuming you mean in your own class.
Yeah.
But across a department, would it be a good idea to have a consistent
That is
application?
we get asked that all the time. So we recommend that departments are consistent about what their absentee policy is that they're enforcing. But we understand that senior faculty who have been here for decades and decades are gonna do what they're gonna do. So we encourage you to consult with your chair, consult with your dean, try to make it as consistent as possible, but again, that's just our recommendation, we can't enforce it. But again, it does avoid a lot of conflict in the future if a student says, hey, I know that my friend in this other class was able to get away with this and you're not letting me do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, that's a really good question. So let's say, for example, the disruptive behavior continues after you've already laid out the groundwork. So confrontation is really uncomfortable with students. I work in student discipline and on students on this radar, and I still get uncomfortable with those situations. But if I challenge you to approach it as more like empathic. Think about it in a way as you're coaching the student, you're helping them, you're encouraging them to succeed. That might make it a little bit less uncomfortable and less of an adversarial conversation. Invite them to meet with you after class, invite them to your office hours, talk about what your guidelines are, and then follow up with the student in writing. Hey Jimmy, we met today, this is what we talked about. Again, these are the expectations. Please refer back to your syllabus. Please let me know if you have any questions. Here's some resources too. In the same written notification, it's again okay to outline, this is what I expect from you and all other students moving forward. So, they've ignored you, what do? Document your concerns again, send the student another email. Documentation is important. And Nasha can talk about documentation here in a bit. Notify the student that if the behavior continues, you're going to refer them to the Dean of Students office. You also have the right under the faculty handbook to tell a student to leave, and if they refuse to do so, you can call the police. If that happens, contact the Dean of Students office. Let us know what's going on. You can also complete a care report online. And again, the care team is a lot of people from different backgrounds taking a look at this report, and they can consult with you on best approaches.
Question.
Yeah.
So would you recommend in this sequence that before you fill out the care report, you confront the student, and if the student is, I think sometimes the faculty in my college are struggling with the third step and the fourth step.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to the fourth step so they don't have to direct the student to leave. And
That's
they're avoiding the confrontation
Yeah.
when it gets really bad.
So again, and I would challenge a faculty member not to look at it as a confrontational conversation with the student. It could be a legitimate learning moment for that student that they just haven't had an opportunity for it to sink in. And again, that can be incredibly uncomfortable for faculty members. So at any moment during this process, a faculty member can fill out a care report, and we can start coaching them, working with them, and deferring to their experience too to work through the situation. So I don't want to say that the care report should only be done at this time. At any time when a faculty member wants us to be aware or wants help, please feel free to fill out the care report.
You're probably going to cover this, but when a faculty member fills out a care report, then there's say it happens on a Thursday and the care team meets on Monday.
Mhm.
Is it reasonable to expect that the faculty will hear back from the care team?
It really just depends. I try to be consistent in reviewing the materials that come through the reporting system, but the care report is not an emergency response.
Right.
We do our best to be responsive in a timely manner, but we can't always guarantee that we're going to have that immediate
But will
turnaround.
there be a response?
We try to. Sometimes we may get a report that is clearly a Title IX issue from a faculty member, and it will get automatically upgraded to Title IX, and then OEO is going to start reaching out to the reporting party, the faculty member.
You know, I think that, everyone in my college is really trying hard.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're trying, but they're missing a lot of steps still. So if something happens, send to the care team, the care team decides that it's a Title IX, it gets sent to OEO, we still have a faculty member that
Okay.
doesn't have information, so we need,
Well,
that's a little-
let me jump in and take it back a
Sure.
little bit. The first step is I highly encourage the faculty member, because it's your classroom, right? To say this behavior, you witnessed the behavior, we didn't, the care people didn't, the Dean of Students didn't. You witnessed the behavior, you drafted the syllabus, so you know what you put in your syllabus about what's appropriate or inappropriate, and it happened in real time.
Right.
So although some people are really conflict averse, sometimes you have to have the conversation, like, I'm sorry, that crossed the line, don't do it again. That's important for a couple reasons. One, it establishes that the faculty member's authority in that classroom is the person who can set those rules. Two, it tells the student that if you do something wrong, you're going to get called out for it. It's not going to slide. You're not going to get away with it. You're not going to do it 8 more times because you thought it was okay the first time. It's a little like, how Cesar Millan does he doesn't like spank the dog. He just goes, tss. All you're saying is like, hey, not cool, don't do that. If that doesn't work, then elevate it. But if the professor isn't telling the student in real time, this isn't okay, cut it out, one, the student's going to continue to think it is fine and it'll probably get worse. And two, the professor has missed an opportunity to establish some authority in that dynamic. Healthy authority in that dynamic, of course, right? Then the care report. So when it comes in as a care report, we check them regularly, but let's talk about what happens with the care report. When we say we check them regularly, what it means is we look at them and we read them. We meet once a week. If it's super emergency, we'll meet faster to talk about it. But we meet and we talk and we come together with like ideas of how to support that faculty member or help them. It's not some magic eraser. It's not some perfect solution and all of a sudden, poof, everything's perfect. It's not. The student's likely still going to come back to class with that professor. That professor likely is still going to feel a little uncomfortable. So if I just don't want the care report to be seen as a way of like, for example, with Title IX cases, if a student came to you and reported they had been sexually assaulted, then you'd say, okay, let me walk you over to Lobo Respect, and they'll help you with your support services and advocacy, and then you fill out your OEO report and you get to be done, right? That's not how this works. If you have a student that's causing problems in your class, you likely aren't going to get rid of it very quickly. Yes?
I assume at some point in the slide presentation, you're going to go into what it means to prepare a care report, because I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, so we didn't put it up, but if you click the link or if you just Google UNM Care Report, it'll come up. And it essentially just asks you information about what happened. Now, and so you don't really need directions, you just tab to the next box and fill it in, right? What happens?
So it's just a report.
It's just a
basically
report.
memo of what happened.
Yes, and what it does is you're sending that, remember, to the care team, the multidisciplinary team that can review it and think about, is the student struggling in other areas? Was this an isolated incident? How could we help the faculty member navigate that situation? Could we reach out to the student and talk to them? So your question, Regina, about whether or not we get back to the faculty, it depends.
Anything that's that important should not be going through the care team.
I would think that, look, if you were like, I was so scared I couldn't breathe and we're going to get to this, no, you call the police.
Right.
If you're like, hey, it was a minor disruption, you should take care of a minor disruption. And if something about it seemed weird, not just a classroom disruption, something about it seemed alarming to you, then it's a care report. A care report isn't every time that some student tries to commandeer your class with too much commentary, right? It's like that something else, that little something else. How much information we can give the faculty member depends. So sometimes, if the faculty member themselves, it was my classroom and I experienced this incident, and then I want to know the status is likely, the care team met, we discussed it, here are some tips for you, right? But if I'm someone else who witnessed it, or my friend who's a faculty member told me it happened, can we tell that person everything that we're doing? Probably not. And we'll get to that when I talk about FERPA.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions on this slide?
It's good to ask questions,
Yeah.
it makes it interactive.
So these are some additional things we want people to know that they can consider. If a student's provided you documentation that they're working with ARC, call ARC. They are really an invaluable resource about providing suggestions on how to work with a student who might have a disability. They may not be able to tell you specifically about what is going on with the student due to confidentiality, but they can give you some tips on how to better communicate with the student, or maybe that student needs to have a fidget in their hand. They're not doing it to be disruptive, but it's helping them concentrate. So that's a really important resource. It's really important to document your attempts to resolve the matter. Again, the communication with your chair, with your dean, with your other colleagues.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, please.
So documentation is something that will make public employees a little nervous if they're aware. But, and this is why. So as public employees, you should assume that everything you write down, every text message, every note, Facebook message, email, if you kept a personal notebook and you're writing things down about things that happened at work, you should assume, to be extra safe and cautious, that all of that is subject to public disclosure. Now, the law allows for certain exemptions to public disclosure. One of them, let's say, being when it deals with confidential information about a student. So let's say Lydia said to document, and I'm like, check, I'm going to document, and I write a long email to my chair telling them everything that happened between me and the student. That documentation is not a bad thing. We encourage it, but how you do it is important. So students, I'm going to get to this, but students have a right to their education record, which can be your emails about them. And when they get their education record, they get it unredacted. So that means, let's say you hadn't taken this training and you were like, you know, it's your colleague in your department and you're venting about a student and you're saying all these things that are just terrible. Then the student asks to see their education records, including any emails related to them. They go unredacted, including your name. So how I treat everything I write down at work, and I do document a lot of things very carefully because it helps you keep a record and a log, and besides you deal with so many people, you're bound to forget some things, right? I pretend it's like a note in junior high where I just wrote down the person I have a huge crush on, and at any minute it could fall out of my bag. Someone could Xerox it and give it to everyone. Which is an example that's good for people that grew up in the 80s but not millennials, but still. Think about it like that. So if you're writing something about someone, pretend they're going to read it. And we'll go into some tips, but documentation is good. If you meet with a student, for example, write down the date at the top of the paper, the time that you started meeting with them, their name, some ideas and things that you talked about, some points you want to follow up. Write the time you closed out the meeting, because I've had people come to me and say, well, you wouldn't even talk to me about it. And I'm like, really? I met with you for 2 hours. And so when people are in crisis, it's not that they're lying. They just may not be processing that information properly. Disturbing behavior. So if they're making written or verbal comments about self-harm or suicide, I would say that it's not uncommon for students to kind of joke about that, like I could just kill myself or I want to die, that test was so hard. Those comments should never be taken lightly, and Agora is an excellent resource. And it's free to students, and it could be something that maybe you could say or check in with the student, how are you doing, offer that resource, it's wonderful. If they appear to be just rapid decline, and this kind of goes into that. This one, if they're making comments about anger, rage, weapons, enacting violence, those are things you may see in papers that they submit, in comments that they make in class. You may be the eyes and ears for the university on that type of stuff, and it should be reported. So what do? Safety first. And the first time I saw this presentation, Dr. MacGyver from Student Health and Counseling, she's the head of counseling, she made a really good point in regard to this. So we talked about how, students in New Mexico are coming to us with their own potential trauma histories. We all have ours too, and we all have our own thresholds. So what scares me may not scare Lydia, and what bothers Lydia may not bother me. The point is to trust your personal instinct. If you get to a point where your personal instinct, you don't have to talk yourself out of it. If your personal instinct is, I'm scared, I don't like this, I'm super uncomfortable, then act on that instinct. Get yourself to a safe place, call the police. The first person that you call in that situation is not me, which seems ridiculous to say, but that's true, because I have had people call me in that situation, and I'm like, okay, hang up, call the police, right? Okay, So let's see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have to, when you're articulating why you're that scared, why you feel it's an immediate safety concern, you have to articulate that to police. So if I said, and this happened, well, there's someone here and they're sitting outside of my office. And then it took the police a while to get to me. What I should have said was, this person has been banned from campus and has a history, and they're unstable, and we have reason to believe X, Y, and Z, and they're sitting here now, and they've been hard to apprehend. You need to come now. See how that's different? Then, and I said a little bit of that, but to be determined. You can complete a care report. We talked about what the care team does. You can consult with your chair about safety in the learning environment. So what that means is, sometimes I'll hear from faculty that have a really tense situation happening with the student, and I don't have, as the Dean of Students, I don't have control over your academic environment. So if you, for example, wanted to switch up your office hours, if you wanted to, employ different techniques like that, or communicate with the student by email only, those are all things that you should talk about with your chair. Those are things that I can't do. But we could also, our team and the care team and the Dean of Students office can help you brainstorm things that might work, techniques that we've seen other people use that were successful. Let's see. You can contact student health and counseling. They can't give you any information about a student though, so don't be too disappointed. And like Lydia said, ARC is really a wonderful resource. Even if they don't tell you if they're seeing that student, they might give you some tips and ideas on what to do. Okay, so dangerous behavior. Student threatens to hurt themselves, others, or you. They exhibit uncontrollable rage. They're writing about specific plans to hurt themselves or others. They're posting threats on social media, and they have or they had a weapon on campus, right? This is all danger. If you see anything like this, this is danger. This is slightly different. If you could go back, Lydia. Go back again. Notice how we're talking about they're making bizarre comments related to weapons and enacting violence, versus when it's dangerous, they're talking about specific plans. Okay. So, dangerous behaviors, and this is true, and I've been doing this a while, are rare. They are rare. We also notice that you can't be blind to it, that in today's day and age, and mass shootings and school shootings, it's okay to accept that we are all probably hypervigilant, probably more alert, and frankly, probably more scared, right? After there is a mass shooting incident anywhere in the country, we will see a huge influx of calls to our office. And I think it's because maybe the behavior was the same 2 weeks previous, but now the people who are like the recipients of that behavior are now really scared and starting to wonder what if, right? But they are rare. So let's see. Safety first again, right? How many of you, actually I won't make you raise your hands, but we're all required to have safety protocols for our office. And that's something that I think the provost mandated for the deans and the chairs maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And our office has safety protocol, an emergency preparedness plan that talks about what we're going to do, key words that we're going to use to say this is, I need help, or this is dangerous. When they do a test of the sirens on campus, we practice lockdown protocols or evacuation protocols or barricading protocols. If you don't have a plan like this, you're also all supposed to be trained as part of your mandatory training with EOD. It's an online training. But if you don't have this, then set it up. And UNM PD and Byron will even come and walk through your space and go through ideas. And part of the reason why that's nice to have preemptively, one, it's because it's something you should be planning and you should be doing. But the other reason why is that if there was a mass shooting incident somewhere else in the country, right, then you know people are going to be more jumpy on campus. Then something happens. You're not running around freaking out, and people are, part of their criticism then is, we don't even have a plan. You do have a plan. And you are ready if it happened. So let's see. You document the incident again, right? You can send a report to the Dean of Students as soon as possible. The best practice for that too is you can email the DOS, general email, dos@unm.edu, or if you were emailing me in particular, because let's say we had a relationship, also CC someone else, because I get like 200-300 emails a day and there's a chance I could miss it, right? So if you emailed Lydia and I, for example, or Lydia and Kelly, that would be better than just me. You know your own limits. And the disciplinary action and the emergency bans from campus I wanted to talk to you about. So, under the US Constitution, and I break it down that way, if the government was removing a property right, and the US Supreme Court has determined that education in public institutions is a property right, you are entitled to due process. So I've tried explaining this explaining that foundation to people when they're upset, and they're like, well, that doesn't make sense, like, we'll just go out and change the laws. But it's the US Constitution, that's why I say it that way. And it's the US Supreme Court, it's well-founded law. So what that means is if you are suspending or expelling a student, or banning them from campus in a way that impedes their right to an education, they're entitled to due process. And under our rules at UNM, due process, I lovingly call it the 7-layer dip, but there's 7 layers of appeal at UNM, all the way up to the regions as a student. So as you can imagine, that takes time. So, and it's not something that we do lightly. If it's a deprivation of a property right, which is their education right, meaning suspension, expulsion, or a ban from campus, it has a pretty high threshold. The threshold for an emergency ban from campus is a health and safety issue or a disruption to the educational environment. Now, I've had some faculty members say, well, this is disrupting my educational environment, but then we have to do a balancing test between does that merit depriving a student a property right? So part of that analysis is that it could depend on a pattern of behavior, it could depend on the severity, it could be, was this an isolated incident, is it happening in other places? Could we modify the behavior and get the student to fix what they're doing without having to go to that extreme? The other thing I'd like to say about an emergency ban from campus is that it's not a cure-all. So some faculty members have said to us, well, just ban them from campus because I think they just want it to go away. It is not a cure-all. So if a student is banned from campus and they violated the ban and we caught them, it's a very big campus by the way, and you caught them, then that could result in an increased disciplinary action, right? It could potentially result in like a criminal trespass if UNM PD caught them, but the consequences for a criminal trespass aren't huge. So if this idea is like, you're banned, that means there's this imaginary circle around me and I'm never going to interact with you again, that's unlikely. The other thing about a ban from campus is that, and this is our plea to you, is that if a student was banned from campus but they're taking online classes, oh no, they asked to finish their classes online, we recommend that student to approach the faculty members themselves. So you're taking some responsibility for your actions, you're doing some self-advocacy. So if you ever have a student reach out to you and email you and say, I was banned from campus, can I complete my coursework online or with this type of accommodation or whatever, we would really appreciate it if you helped us out and tried to do that. You could call our office and confirm, are they really banned? We'll share with you whatever information we can, but also keep in mind, just because a student is banned, it may not be a campus-wide ban, it may be specific to certain areas. There may be pieces of the case that I can't tell you. If you're just their chemistry professor, for example, and they haven't had any incidents with you, I can't tell you everything that was happening in the dorms, for example, right? So just because a student's banned doesn't mean the sky is falling, and it also doesn't mean I can share all information with you. The last piece that we really wanted to touch on is healthcare interventions. So a lot of times in really intense, dangerous situations, people will say, well, they clearly have a mental health disability, so just send them away to a locked mental health institution. That is not what the Dean of Students office or the University of New Mexico does. Healthcare interventions are completely separate from us. The diagnosis, whether or not it happens, the court hearings, the involuntary commitment, whether or not it's prolonged, all of that happens apart from us. Sometimes we can get some information about it, but because of HIPAA, a lot of times we can't. So if a faculty member was in crisis or really scared and they were saying, all right, you're going to expel them, Okay, we just went through this, right? It's gonna take some time. If it raised to the level of expulsion, 7-layer dip, it's gonna take some time. If they say you're gonna emergency ban them from campus and I'm never gonna run into them again, I can't guarantee that, especially because, like, what about the grocery store, or what about life, right? Or if they say, well, they're mentally ill, one, I don't know that, and two, they should just be locked up, you know, I have no control over that, right? So that, if it's super dangerous, it's important to think about this context, because I think a lot of times people say, well, there's gotta be some magic solution. And the truth is, in this work, unfortunately, there's not, and it can be a prolonged process with a lot of communication between a lot of different entities. FERPA?
Yeah,
FERPA.
FERPA.
Okay, so I already gave you a FERPA warning and an IPRA warning, and clearly I like FERPA and IPRA, but that is true. And I encourage you to use professionalism in all times, and to think about, when you're talking about someone, with that lens, like Lydia said, of empathy and compassion. You can do not diagnose a student, but you can call out characteristics of the behavior. For example, the student is showing up consistently late to my class and they used to be punctual. The student's eyes were dilated, their eyes were red, they smelled of alcohol, they seemed to not be imbalanced, right? I can say all of those things without saying the student is a raging alcoholic and has PTSD. See the difference? So you can call out the characteristics. I'm not saying don't name the characteristics, don't name the behavior you've observed. I'm saying don't diagnose it. Because even if you were a mental health provider, chances are you're not that student's mental health provider and you really don't know. So you could have a person who, let's say, has Tourette's, and it manifests not in a verbal tic but a physical tic. And that physical tic makes you really uncomfortable. They move in a certain way and it makes you really uncomfortable. And you've decided that they have this physical tic because, not because of Tourette's, because you don't know their life, but because, you know, they're dangerous or agitated or angry at you. You see how quickly that got off the rails? So instead, if you called out the behavior and said, I've noticed that the student moves this way, and you describe how they move, you can also say, it makes me uncomfortable because I'm not sure what it means, or I'm not sure whatever. I'm not saying you aren't allowed to have feelings about the situation, but you can see how completely different that analysis is and how important it is to make those distinctions in how you describe it. So let's see. The other thing that we encourage people to do, these are examples. And before I went to law school, I worked as an advocate for people with disabilities. And I would encourage us as educators, as people of the university, as moral human beings, to think about creating a space that's inclusive for all people. And if, for example, I said something like this, like I looked at the student's Facebook and I think he used to be in the military, so I know he must have guns and PTSD. I already called the police about him. Like, not only legally, dang, but dang as like a human, right? So now this student is supposed to go to this professor to gain knowledge, to expect to be graded fairly, to expect to have a fair shake in an interaction, to expect if they're having a bad day and maybe they are triggered or they're upset or whatever, that they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if I was them and I read this, I would think, what's the point of being here, right? So these words have power. The other thing that sometimes is easy to forget is the power differential between a professor and a student. And they really do look up to you, and you really do dictate how they perceive the world around them. And so when they read those types of words from their own professor, it impacts them even worse. So we also request that you don't Google students. I know that's really, really tempting, but let me tell you why. Anything you found out about Googling them isn't going to help you teach them better. It isn't going to help us. It's definitely not going to help the situation. So for example, you Google the student and you discover that they have a criminal background. And maybe you're particularly a little jumpy about that. So you decide, you tell us like, oh my God, or you email everybody and you tell them, this student has a criminal background. Well, let's break it down. First of all, lots of students have criminal backgrounds and lots of people have criminal backgrounds, in part because Education is seen as a way of reforming, of turning your life around, of having a second chance, right? The other thing is there was a study done by the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that talked about how criminal charges and some criminal convictions should not even be considered when you're applying for jobs, because criminal charges have a statistically disproportionate impact on people of color. And so if a person, let's say, committed larceny 20 years ago and now they're one of your students, does that make them a bad student? You know, who are we to judge that, is my point. But it could lead you to freak out and maybe interact with them differently or make different choices about how you treat them. What if there is a care report, if it gets to the point where we're monitoring the situation, we have people on our team that are excellent Googlers, and they'll track it, they'll find it, they'll see whether or not it's important, they'll know how to weigh it, and it won't put you in a compromising position. Lydia.
So I get asked this probably several times a week. Can't I just drop the student from my class? I don't like this kid. This kid's a jerk. I want him out. You can't. You can't just drop a student without due process, and that's supported by the faculty handbook. Dropping a student without due process is a violation of their civil rights. We're a public institution, and they have a right to due process. So if we drop them without that, then we're depriving them of their rights. Again, you can ask a student to leave class for the day, or they can be removed by police if they refuse, but you cannot drop a student. But there is an exception to that rule under the faculty handbook, and that's for excessive absences. This kind of goes back to looking at what your language about your attendance policy is. So again, consult with your chair, consult with your dean. If you want to nip these situations in the bud before they develop, talk to your chair and your dean about how you're going to treat class participation as an attendance policy. Students who come and go as they please, let them know in your syllabus. That's going to count as an absence. Under the faculty handbook, the only way that you can drop a student is for excessive absences.
What about online classes?
So again, that goes back to the participation. So however you guys are able to develop what your participation looks like in your syllabus,
Right.
consult with your department if you can tie that in to class attendance, basically. So under the faculty handbook, it also talks about classroom conduct. You guys are the anchor in your classroom of what is going to be expected of students and what you're basically going to allow for behavior in your class. So again, if a student is creating a disturbance under the faculty handbook, you have the right to direct them to leave, and if they refuse to do so, you have the right to call the police. And again, it talks about reporting those situations to the Dean of Students office too.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So those two things could go hand in hand, right? If you're constantly having to ask them to leave, then that does directly affect their participation.
Right, and their attendance, right? And it goes back to saying, you know, outlining in your syllabus, if I ask you to leave, that's an absence.
Right.
So as we're getting ready to wrap up, here's some really helpful resources. Again, the Coping with the 7 Disruptive Personality Types by Dr. Amata. It is such an incredibly helpful paper. And it's not like a diagnosed personality type. It's more like dealing with the litigious student, dealing with the confrontational student, dealing with the know-it-all. It's really, really useful information. There's also the Center for Teaching and Learning here at UNM. Dr. Haney's the director there. She's been an instructor for over 2 decades. She will come and do in-person training on classroom management, best techniques, that sort of thing. She's a completely invaluable resource here on campus. And of course, there's SHAC. Dr. McIver is always open to consultation when time permits. ARC, again, Joan Green, always open to consultation. Our office, we're here to help and support. Global Respect Advocacy Center. OEO too. OEO is probably an underused resource for faculty. They're important because they can help you navigate potential ADA issues, civil rights issues. Those things do come up often. So pick up the phone and give Francie a call over at OEO, and she will walk you through those situations that could turn out to be really tricky.
I was thinking too about the comment that you made about the professor who may not want to confront the student in the moment. There are, with ombuds, They could do some role playing. And one of the things that we do in our office that I found to be profoundly helpful, that I'm not sure that other people do as frequently, is we call them case debriefs, where after it's resolved, we'll sit down and we'll just dissect how the case evolved, what we did in that case, what we could have done differently, and analyze how we approached it and how to improve. And that's something that we've been doing probably before I got to the office, but it is really helpful. So if you had a situation with the student, let's say you're a chair, and the faculty member had a situation with the student and it was bumpy, bumpy, bumpy. And then at the end of that, once it's over, tension has diminished, it might be a good idea to sit down and do a case debrief and think out how it went. What could we have done better? What could we have done differently? Sometimes when we do case debriefs, we'll invite other people outside of us to give us criticism or feedback on how we could improve. And if it was a case where we helped out, for example, and you wanted feedback, we'd be happy to participate in that. We do it a lot, so we know we can. We're not, trust me, we're not judgy, because we're in the business too, where it's easy to make mistakes and we're constantly learning and evolving. So sometimes the nice thing about having community partners or university partners in a case debrief is they could say, man, if you would have told us that, we could have done it differently. I think about, particularly, we had a case where a faculty member reported that a student was looking at them in a way that was menacing and scary, but the student didn't make any threats, and the student didn't, they didn't have any of the quintessential markers. And then months later, I met with the faculty, and they were a math teacher, and they told me that it scared them so bad they couldn't add. And I thought, wow, if they could have explained that to me in real time, that's different than they're just sitting in the classroom and looking at me in an ugly way, or like a mean, kind of dark, brooding way, maybe was the word. And again, see how tricky that situation is to navigate if the student didn't make any threats, didn't disrupt the classroom, but it was intense enough where that math teacher couldn't add, dang, that's serious. So even sometimes that moment for me was a real teaching moment. One of the things I've learned in case debriefs too is to ask faculty members, okay, what would be your ideal outcome in this situation? What would you like to see? So that they can articulate what it is they need to feel supported. I mean, those are all things that we've learned from doing case debriefs. So if you have had a situation similar to any of these and you want to learn from them, it's a great thing to do.
So we used to be called BARC for, Lobos, get it? Now we're the CARE team, so the chart hasn't changed. But again, this is on care.unm.edu. This is a quick kind of go-to chart if, behavior is exhibited, and then it tells you how to respond to that behavior from the most serious to the less serious. Again, it's available online, and again, I'm happy to distribute this PowerPoint to anyone who's interested. So that's all we have. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or comments?
Yes, I have a question within a question.
Okay.
Yes.
This just happened about 3 hours ago.
Okay.
Strangely enough. And I had a disruptive sister to a student. And the student had been dropped the student dropped himself from the class and wanted to get back in after deadlines and everything, and was told no, and then actually came with the sister. And the student himself hardly said anything. And I had to interrupt or it's the other way around, the sister was constantly talking, and I said, yeah, but so-and-so happened, and she interrupted me about 20 times.
In the classroom?
No,
Okay.
no, in the office.
Okay.
And until at the end, I almost told her in the beginning, this has nothing to do with you, this has to do with the student and us, and the kid is 22. So I almost sent her away.
Mm-hmm.
Last semester I had a guy who came in for a disciplinary thing, and he had a lawyer with him. And so I told the lawyer, I said, this has nothing to do with you, and the student was about 45 or so. And so there seems to be this tendency of students to rely on parents, to rely on, in this case, the sister, who was extremely in my face all the time, accused me in a way of racism. The exact words were, the student said that his uncle was ill, that his father was ill, turns out his uncle is ill. And I said, well, father or uncle is not the same thing. And the woman, not the student, the sister said, well, this is Tiwa country. We're using Indian, Native American rules. An uncle, father, what's the difference? This is all the same thing, and you should pay attention to that kind of stuff. I don't know this stuff. I didn't look at the kid's race. I don't know. So they seem to be so pushy and so demanding. And when one of the things at the very beginning, the sister said, well, the student didn't know that he had dropped after the registration deadline, so it needs a late enrollment if he wants to get back in. And the sister said, well, he doesn't know this stuff. This is his third semester, and he had dropped with permission, without permission, so he knows the system. How the hell do I deal with a sister who has no right whatsoever to speak for her 22-year-old brother? How do I deal with this? I don't know.
Well, we see it a lot too. And I would say that once you're already in the meeting, it's hard to control it at that point. So, the case debrief. What you could do is, first of all, you can't talk to the sister about anything related to the student unless the student has filled out the FERPA release and proxy.
Okay.
And so that can slow it down instantly, because what you're trying to do is redirect. And so what you could do is student shows up with sister, and what we would do is I would say, oh, hello, meet the student, nice to meet you, whatever, nice to meet the sister. He says, this is my sister, she came with me to talk about this. Then I would say, I'm sorry, but I really can't talk to you about any of your confidential student information unless I have a proxy for your sister to be here.
That's a piece of paper.
Yeah, but it's a special piece of paper. So the proxy is a form. Now there's a couple different ways you can play this. Technically under the law, under FERPA, you cannot release confidential student information without prior written consent from the student. And FERPA outlines what prior written consent needs to have. It needs to be dated, it needs to be specific, it can expire, it needs to be signed by the student. However, at the University of New Mexico, we employ this proxy form. So if you go to Office of the Registrar and you go to Forms, and then you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the proxy form. What I personally really like about the proxy form is it has some built-in checks and balances. One, you as someone who doesn't love FERPA as passionately as me, know that you've then met all the standards for prior written notice to release the information. Two, there are very specific instructions the student has to follow to submit the proxy form. And the proxy form gets submitted to the Office of the Registrar, and then you get a copy of it. So see how much that just slowed that interaction down and took her out of the anger in the moment? And how you explain it to the student instead of like, I'm a bureaucracy and I like bureaucratic things, is you say, hey, I have to abide by the laws, it's federal law, and it's designed to protect you and your privacy, because what if, it wasn't your sister, what if it was someone else that you didn't want to know? This just keeps us all nice and clean, just so that I know that I have your permission to talk to her and what we get to talk about. Then they have to go get the proxy form, fill it out, take it to the Office of the Registrar, and then come back. So let's say they did that. Now she's cooled off. She had a cooling off period, and who knows, maybe he's on to the next class. So maybe he's not. Then they come back. So you first check to make sure they have the proxy, and then what I do in those meetings, and I've had a lot of training on it, is I always start by laying some ground rules. So I say, for example, thank you, sister, for coming, but it's really important to me to only hear from the student. So you can attend this meeting and listen and take notes, but you won't be able to interject. You can't commandeer the meeting. I have to just be able to hear from the student, because it's their life that it's impacting. And those are the ground rules. Do you think we can do it? And they'll say, yes, of course. You may have to redirect it a couple times. If they don't, then you say, if they don't, because she's like, we're in here, and they don't, then you just say, I'm sorry, I can't speak to you about this, I have to speak to him. Because what the proxy says is she gets access to information. It doesn't say she gets to dictate the conversation or what you do.
No, I understand, and I tried that about 5 times. I don't think she would have taken the suggestion of, look, I need a paper form,
Yeah.
and why don't we do this on Tuesday of next week?
Then you end the meeting. because this is the thing, you're not under any obligation to talk to her or to take verbal abuse from her. So you end the meeting and you ask her to leave. The other thing I'll do, and I'm fortunate in that sometimes by the time they get to me, they've yelled at like 5 people in my office. So I know exactly what's coming, like I can kind of brace for it, right? You didn't know, they just caught you off guard and you got hollered at. But if you know what's coming, sometimes what I'll even do is say, we have 30 minutes for this meeting. You can choose how to spend it, I'm here to listen. And then 10 minutes I'll say, and sometimes if it's really tough, I'll make the time even shorter and I'll say, you have 10 minutes. Is there any other key points you want to cover? You have 5 minutes. Are there any other things you want me to know? And then I just say, thank you for coming and our time is up. And then if they don't leave, and that has happened, then you can just you can sternly but affirmatively say, I asked you to leave. And if you are unable to leave, I'll have to call the police. Yeah.
Unfortunately, they eventually left, and they were kind of semi-happy with the compromise that I offered.
Oh, that's nice of you.
But still, it was one thing that I see oftentimes is students say, well, I didn't read the syllabus. And
That's their responsibility.
yeah, but it doesn't seem as if anything sticks. It doesn't seem as if anyone then is having our back and saying, well, you didn't read the syllabus, so you're SOL on this. I told the student, and naturally mostly the sister, that the last day to register was a week ago. She said, well, my brother doesn't know that. And I'm thinking, well, how is that my problem?
Totally
It became
not.
my problem because that's what she said, that we should have been as a department, we should have, I don't know what we should have done, but it was our responsibility in her mind.
Yeah, and that's, we see that all the time, especially in student discipline, students bringing a family member, a parent, they want some sort of immediate response, and it ends up putting like this anxiety on yourself that you have to give them this response right away. And eventually I learned, and this is just my own personal approach, is that I don't have to give anybody any immediate response. So if a student comes in with their parent and they have their FERPA form and they want answers, I say, okay, I want to hear your concerns. Let me hear what's going on. Okay, like Nasha said, I took some notes. I'm going to look into this. I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to send the student an email to your student address, your UNM address, and hopefully we can start working on some sort of resolution. But I don't no longer tell myself that I have to somehow give some sort of immediate response to students.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you end up also saying the wrong thing, right? And which makes things worse. And then they say, that's not what you said in our meeting. So I prefer just to hear what their concerns are, then send them an email with my response. And then I can't be accused of saying the opposite thing in the meeting.
But in general, if someone else but the student is present as well, I can waive that proxy form and simply close it in the meeting until I have that
Yes,
form
you
in
can.
hand.
And it slows it down.
Yeah, sure. No, I
It
understand
does,
that.
and it sometimes can redirect it, it can diffuse it, but it gives it a cool out period before it comes to you. And ideally, what you're also doing is protecting the student's rights. What if the student didn't want their sister in that meeting and didn't want them knowing all that information and talking so rudely to their professor? You're also giving them, and the other thing is a student, I talked to you about in K through 12 how we have to identify disabilities, right? In higher education, they have to self-identify. That's part of a bigger theme, that this is college, and you have to be able to self-advocate and accept responsibility and accept the consequences for your actions and learn how to navigate a university. Know when to drop a course. Know that if you're required to do something by my office, you have to do it or the consequence could be worse. Those are all life lessons that I wish they would have got before they got here, but they're here now. And so I think you have to hold that line too. And I have had people call and yell, and I have a pretty good threshold, call and yell for a while, and I set boundaries because I don't like being yelled at. You have to speak to me in an appropriate tone, you have to lower your voice, or I didn't interrupt you, so please don't interrupt me. And if they can't abide by those rules, I get off the phone. But I have had someone, after they calm down, they're yelling for a while, and they're getting circular in what they're saying, there's no new information. I just tell them, I don't think you've raised any new points, and I've heard you, but my answer hasn't changed, which sometimes can make them more mad. And this one mom, I actually told her, I said, I'm not Southwest Airlines. It's not like if you yell at me enough, I'm just going to give you a free ticket. She laughed too, and we both kind of laughed, and I was like, I totally hear you though, and I wrote it all down, but it's not like suddenly the drop date isn't going to apply to your kid,
But so that's perfectly legitimate to say, I
Yes.
cannot talk to you because
Yes.
I don't have that form.
In fact, I prefer.
Unless that the other person leaves and only the student is there.
Correct.
Okay?
And and with the attorney, I forgot to, before we get to that, if anyone ever comes to meet with you, an attorney, you should not meet with someone and their attorney unless you have a university attorney with you. So you instantly stop the meeting and reschedule it and say, I'm gonna need to get our attorney here as well.
Well, I told them that, and the student was somewhat aggravated. The attorney said, well, I wait outside.
That's the smart thing to do.
And I told the student that it had nothing to do, he was not in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
He was fixing to get in trouble, but he wasn't in trouble. There was nothing I just wanted to warn him that so-and-so behavior was not appropriate.
Mhm.
And he thought, of course, that, all hell would break loose, so he already brought the lawyer.
Yeah,
And, but the lawyer understood.
and that's the better thing to do. Yeah, let me go here first, and then we'll,
I gathered from your response to him, don't know your name, I'm sorry.
You're both.
You. I gathered from both of your responses that in the context of a potentially contentious meeting with a student, I've only had like 2 or 3 in 30 years of teaching, doesn't
Right.
happen very often, but that in that kind of situation, rather than responding, it's best to listen carefully, take notes, and ask questions that might help give you information about how you're going to respond at a later point. And then say, okay, I think I got what I needed to hear, and I will try to respond to your concern or your question at such and such a day. And you don't commit at that point to any particular course of action, particularly if your emotions are all riled up. At least in my case, I probably wouldn't make the right decision anyway.
right.
And in that way, I can later document what was done and then respond. And the student probably won't like the response, but that's beside the point. I mean, it'll be a better response as a consequence. Did I get that?
Yeah, I think,
right?
I mean, that's, I rarely make a decision in a meeting. I usually wait, process it, consult with past practice, think about it from different angles before I give an answer, especially if it deals with an upset student or parent or something like that. Yeah.
And what I've also learned, and again, my time here at UNM, is that oftentimes they come in hot and ready for an argument, but ultimately they initially just wanted to be heard because they've been directed in many different ways to different offices and given responses. And yes, correct, that behavior is not okay, but ultimately they're just trying to get somebody to listen to them and help them problem solve. And again, that's not always going to be the way it turns out, but that's usually, typically in my experience, how it is.
And I've had students come and meet with me, granted it's different because I'm not their instructor, right? And they'll come and they'll talk to me for 30, 40 minutes about this long list of how difficult UNM was to navigate, and this person and that person, and the wrong answer, and it's a tangled web. And I write it down and I make sure I understand what they're telling me, and at the end I've started doing this, and it's really great because it's never what I thought they wanted. I say, why did you come see me today, and what would be your ideal outcome? And they said, almost always, they say, I wanted you to know about it. I wanted you to hear about it. I wanted you just to know that this was really difficult for me. And then I say, okay, do you want me to share it with the people that you had this experience with? And they're like, only if you take my identity out of it. I say, okay, but like they might benefit from feedback about process. And there was a student yesterday that came in who was really upset and had tried to make an appointment multiple times with me. And when we sat down, we talked. That was it. They wanted to talk, and they were Native, and at the end of the conversation, they were talking about how hard it was to navigate the university, the complications they were having with it. And I talked to them about if they had ever been to American Indian Student Support Services, and that they could get a student mentor and someone who could help them think about it and help them connect some of the dots that maybe I wasn't as good at, and help connect them to the university. And they're like, no, I didn't even know we had that. I said, you want to go? I'll walk you. And I walked them over there, and it was great. And then, as we were walking over there, she said, it might be nice to just be with people that look and feel a little bit more like me. I said, yeah, I can relate to that, So we walked over there, and I don't know, I'm sure they'll be able to help her. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the idea is, part of her frustration, what I could hear in that moment she wasn't yelling at me. But what I could hear in that moment was that she was just feeling a little out of her element at big old UNM. and she needed a little bit more help breaking it down. And we have a resource center for that. Did you have a question?
Oh, just to clarify, then actually I have another question, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So about the lawyer, I've always wondered, are they supposed to self-disclose that they're a lawyer? So if someone comes with them, will we know they're a lawyer, or do we need to ask?
I wouldn't ask, and I
wouldn't want to ask.
No,
that's
and
why
I
I'm
don't care if they
wondering,
self-disclose.
Are they supposed to disclose
No, I
it,
would
or-
care if they have a proxy. Usually if someone's bringing a lawyer, they're real proud of that fact.
Okay.
It's kind of like, I brought my lawyer and now we're going to show you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Sure.
That's exactly how it went.
yeah. Look what I got.
I know it at the University Council, I just didn't know. if
Yeah,
it was a
yeah.
mechanism. Okay, the second question I had was, you said a really important point, which was disruptive can turn into dangerous. And with FERPA, I know that some faculty are very concerned about talking about the disruptive student because they don't want to break FERPA.
Oh, let me break it down for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so FERPA says you can share information, confidential information about a student. Personally identifiable information is what's considered confidential. So personally identifiable information could be a name if it's related to a certain incident. It could be a series of factors about a student that make a reasonable person in the educational community know who that person is. I'm saying all this because sometimes faculty think they're real smart by using initials like NT, and there's only 4 students in the class and one of them is Nasha Torres, we know who it is, right? Okay, so it's not just name. But if it's within the educational institution, meaning one of your colleagues, and they have a legitimate educational interest, you can talk about it. So what does this mean? Let's break it down. You cannot go home and talk to your partner about it. Like, you wouldn't believe Nasha in class today and what she did and blah, blah, blah. That is not okay. But if your colleague had the student previously, let's say, and you're seeing some behavior that's really frustrating and you want to talk to your colleague like, hey, did you ever see this student behave that way? You can do that. I would recommend the first thing you do is pick up the phone and not necessarily write it down, so that you guys could just have a candid conversation about what you're seeing and observing. Or better yet, go see the person and just talk in person, and then you can even pick up their demeanor when they talk about the student, right? So if you have a legitimate educational interest, you can talk about it. So the law does not define what a legitimate educational interest is, but there is some case law on what it is not. So it is not gossip, and it is not venting. So think to yourself, does this person, even in a mentorship capacity, a colleague who may have had the student in another class, that type of thing, yes. If it's my friend, and they had a guy similar to him last year and I want to vent about it, but it's not the same student, no. If it's, I'm in the hall and I'm so tired of this person because of their whatever, no. If it's venting about it to your partner, no.
But if it's a graduate committee and you're concerned about a graduate student and they're not prepared for their thesis exam, and you are writing to the student saying, you came again not prepared.
Yeah.
It's appropriate for you to CC the entire committee as well as the department chair.
I won't say appropriate, I would say it's FERPA permissible. I'll let you, I don't know enough about how that dynamic would work to tell you if that would be the right thing to do, but it would be permissible. The other thing I would tell you about FERPA is, even though you have a legitimate educational interest, we're even sensitive about it within my office, with my own team. Sometimes Kelly or Lydia will come and we'll brainstorm a case and we'll talk out the fact pattern, and I don't know who the student is. Because what they want to do is not gossip to me or tell me about a student. They want to think through and how to better handle the situation that's happening, or that's what I want. And then, I don't know, a year later, it'll come across my desk and I'll say, I know this fact pattern, but I never knew the name, right? I never knew any details about the situation. So if you want to think out fact patterns that don't have personally identifiable information with a colleague who's not in your department, maybe doesn't have a legitimate educational interest, but they're super experienced, you can do that. So there's ways to do that, yeah. Yes?
I direct interns as part of my job.
Good.
So is it FERPA permissible if an on-site intern supervisor in Washington, for example, not a UNM employee, has a problem with an intern who's registered in one of my classes, getting UNM credit, talks to me, gives the name of the student, asking me for information. It's always seemed to me as though that is a legitimate educational interest, and that's also part of my responsibility in asking someone to put someone in a position.
Well, let's control it a little bit more to make it extra safe. Get all the information from them, but you release very little. Because think about it, in that situation, they're the people that are experiencing the situation with the student. They may or may not be part of the educational institution. It would require a deeper analysis. I think it's likely that they are, but I don't want to give you an opinion about that. But if someone outside of the university gives you a bunch of information about a student, that's not a violation of FERPA. It's just when you start sharing information that you know as in your official capacity with them. So for example, they said, hey, this student is, they're disrespectful, their correspondence are unprofessional, they arrived late, they did this, they did that. And you write it all down, taking notes, can I have copies? Oh, thank you for sharing, that's great, blah, 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 kosher. But if you're like, yeah, they did that last semester in their English class, maybe, maybe not, probably not.
Like, did you get any inkling that this intern really isn't excited about this placement?
Isn't
He
excited?
surprised me as his on-site supervisor.
I see.
That was the
So
main part of it.
FERPA, this is pretty nuanced, but your personal observations that aren't contained in an educational record, you can talk about.
Okay.
So, you could say, I don't know, you probably could, but if he had written down in his application, I'm assuming it's a he, I'm making it up, but if he had written down in his application, I'm not excited about this, and that's how you knew he wasn't excited about it, maybe not.
I think, of course, didn't do it that way, so
Right.
I gotcha, yeah,
But if when you talked to him, he was like, oh, cool, that,
yeah.
then maybe. But you also, the other thing that's tricky about observations is you never know. My grandpa spoke Spanish and he used to say, cada cabeza es un mundo, every head is its own world. So you never know. Like it could be, like you could think he doesn't seem enthusiastic about the placement and he could have just lost a family member. And that's why he was like, okay, you don't know. So I usually don't share my personal observations. Yes?
So I have a comment and then maybe an idea.
Yeah.
So the comment is, thank you, because
thank
I
you.
learned a tremendous amount.
Oh, good.
And I've been here teaching for 8 years, and I really wish that I would have attended something like this when I first started. And that gets into sort of the idea.
Okay.
I think that your jobs would be much, much easier if more faculty had training like this. But I think this kind of training is the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of the things that you mentioned about identifying what are disruptive behaviors, you can write them down and you can give some examples sort of in text. But in a real life dynamic situation, it is difficult sometimes to determine what those things are. And we have our own biases and our own fears that influence the threshold where now suddenly I feel fearful. So it actually seems to me that there's subsequent training that would help as well, that maybe from mental health professionals to focus on what those behaviors are, so you can build those in your thesis. Is there any way that maybe your group could partner with, I forget what the teaching group is, to create almost like a workshop series for instructors that maybe could be associated with a certification? So that then the instructors could get sort of credit for it in a way in terms of how they're evaluated for their teaching.
Oh,
So if I
that's
go through
cool.
this work, right, and go through a series of 3 workshops to do these specific things, and now I get a little special star,
Well,
I would encourage, otherwise instructors get busy and they will often say, yeah, that'd be really good, but I don't have time to do it. So I think you'd have to have some kind of incentive for
I think it's great. I love the idea. And I think what happens is a lot of faculty members, just from my outside perspective, is that they are experts in what they do. I couldn't, let's say they're an expert in world religion, and they're really good at that. And they've taught this class, let's call it a world religion class, for many, many semesters, and they have it down, and they kind of know more or less what questions are going to come at them and when, and they could probably kind of even gauge who's going to ask what and when. They're so good at what they do that sometimes when something like this happens that knocks them off the track a little bit, they have difficulty. And it's, as much as we may lament it at times, this is what we do. I would never pretend to teach a world religion class, but this is what we do. And I think it would be helpful because with teachers, with professors, you assume, oh, you're in college, everyone's fine. You're not gonna, at college, like it should have, you're the cream of the crop students. You're only gonna get those students that are in great shape and perfect. And that's not always true, as all of you know. And so I think giving professors these types of skill sets would be really helpful.
You know, we don't prepare for this kind of training
Yeah.
in graduate school.
Right.
It's like you have to publish, and maybe you teach 1 or 2 classes.
Right.
And a lot of times you have some supervision in that too. And suddenly you're thrust into this environment where, you know, you may have 98% of your students that don't give you any problem, but you encounter now suddenly something you've never encountered before.
Right.
It's a sample size of 1 and you don't know how to handle it.
And I think it's even more pressing for TAs, for example,
Yes.
that are brand new, and they're young and short, a lot of females, of course, and they can be easily intimidated by a student who misbehaves, and I think they need training, that they also need backup from the people that have been here longer in how to handle things like this, and a training like that where the TA gets 1 credit or something like this. I think that would be very helpful, and certainly for new faculty as well.
If you could scroll forward to the resource page with Erin Haney and the Center for Teaching Excellence. She offers a series of courses specifically for TAs and GAs that are really helpful. So if you have people that are in need, you can always direct them to Erin. She's very good. But I agree. I completely agree. And we talked about how, you know, in Regina's situation where the professor felt a little uncomfortable confronting the student, that, to be totally honest, doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. But if we're also being honest, I've been doing that my entire professional career, and I've had mass amounts of training on how to do it. So has Lydia, to the point that some of the things that we do, we don't even realize that we're doing because we've been trained and we've been practicing that technique and then adjusting our technique for years, right? So then when you have professors that are thrust into this situation, it can be a little bit of an unfair match.
And on that note, if you ever have a faculty member in your department who feels as though we didn't address their concerns appropriately or communicate with them, please let us know. It is never our intention to dismiss anything or to minimize their concerns. But there is just 3 of us. It's Kelly back there as our conduct officer, me, and Nasha. And so sometimes we miss things. And again, it's not our intent to be dismissive, but please, you know, pull us by the nose and say, no, you need to contact this faculty member and let them know that you hear them, you hear their concerns. And as Nasha said, you know, my only teaching experience is teaching violent offenders not to like punch out their parole officer. That's my only teaching experience. So I don't know what it's like to be in the front of a classroom. So please, let us hear those concerns.
Yeah,
We
it's
want to
scary
know.
is
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah.
I would
It's
imagine.
very scary, and it's also you're mentally engaged with what you're doing, and then you're trying to control the environment around you, and all of that takes mental and emotional energy. And then something happens you didn't expect.
Yeah.
You're under a load and a burden that makes it so that oftentimes you don't respond as well as you would have, and you're sort of you feel like you're on an island. So knowing that there's support is actually a huge benefit, I think.
And sometimes, you know, knowing that, and although we don't know in that we haven't walked in your shoes, we can understand what you're explaining. And a lot of times when something serious goes down, the professors get really mad at us. And that's because they're scared, that's because they need someone to get mad at, that's because what they want to hear is everything is going to just disappear. I'm going to wave my wand and it's going to be gone, and it's not. And so the other reason why this training is so important is for people, before something intense happens, to understand what you're looking at, to understand that the rules about, for example, students' property right to an education is rooted in the Constitution. To get that into your non-crisis brain now is huge, so that when it happens and you're like, expel them yesterday, Nasha, you'll understand why we can't do it quite like that. So as much as you can, this is being recorded, as much as you can share it. If you have colleagues that you think might benefit and you'd like to invite us to do this again, we'd do it as much as possible.
Yeah, I guess that's my plan. What's your grand plan for dissemination of this information? I know this is the second one.
Yeah, so we're happy to distribute it via email. We're also going to be working with Dr. Lubin very closely now that he's aware of our presentation for faculty development. And of course, our ideal world, we would have time to further develop this and continue to reach out to departments if we had all the free time in the world, but we don't. So if anybody really, really wants to talk to us, please tell them to come to us and contact us directly.
And I think I've done, I mean, we're tracking them, but I think I've done probably about 9 or 10 presentations or discussions with departments per semester about these topics.
But it's funny because we go through, we have a lot because we're a college of the arts and we have an unusually creative clientele. And so, we go through the process so many times. And I can't even tell you these last 2 weeks all the things that have happened. And it's just amazing, all the stuff. And I keep saying, but don't you know? So I guess I would love to, I'm gonna send this to chairs.
I can relate to that feeling. It is often like Groundhog Day in our office too. Every day it's like, wait, didn't we already do this? Like, where's Bill Murray? Yeah. But my response to that would be that when anybody is experiencing a stressful moment, I mean, their higher functionings go out the window, right? They go into like survival mode. And so I think that is why a lot of people often forget what the appropriate response is. What's the plan? Who do I notify? It is because they are experiencing a huge amount of stress if they've experienced a student acting, quite frankly, really inappropriately. So I do have empathy for faculty who may have gone through many similar situations and just forgot what to do.
Right, but I guess I'm just trying to decide whether because I know you've at least come to our college at least twice.
Yes.
And we're all on speed dial.
Yes.
It's true. But I'm just wondering, is this something that I could send to the chairs in the
Yes,
department?
absolutely.
Yes,
Say,
and the provost's office asked me to speak at chair school, but that's new chairs, and like I said, if there's anyone that you think would benefit, we'd be happy to do it. The things we didn't add on here, but we will, I guess, after this is cars. So when you talked about that moment where you were like, I pictured myself in your shoes in front of like Woodward Hall trying to make that happen, and I felt a little panicky. So CARS is a great resource. I think you get 8 therapy sessions. They also have other workshops and things that they offer that could be helpful. Ombuds is a really great resource too, even if sometimes what they could even do, and I didn't realize they did this until recently, they did a presentation for us on their services, and I thought, how cool, is role play a conversation for you. So if, like if you're doing your own case debrief about how uncomfortable it made you when that student came up, you could role play techniques that feel organic to you that you're likely going to employ the next time it happens. But then you're improving. If you stick to just your wheelhouse, which is world religion, and you're not improving this skill set as well, it might be hard for you on repeat.